All right.
We are live.
Well, welcome everyone to the Coaching to Flourish podcast. I'm your host, Raj Anderson, Executive Life Coach and Coach Assessor. So we want you to tune in to us every week. We have hot topics. We have great questions that we answer. So please send us your questions. And we have guest speakers. And today we have John Andrew Williams, founder of Coach Training EDU, as our guest speaker. How are you, John?
I'm doing well. It's sunny out. I'm with you on this call today. This happens to be my 19th wedding anniversary, which is
Congratulations.
super sweet. We got to do a family Valentine's Day. Happy Valentine's Day, everyone, by the way. Yeah, it's been a really sweet day. Really enjoying this. And yeah, we got to do our date this past weekend, which is really super sweet and a real treat for us, given the nature of the ages of our little ones. So here we are.
John, what have you learned in 19 years of marriage?
Well, it's interesting you mentioned this because we talk about it a bit, and we got married young, and we found coaching young, and we developed being married and learning coaching and all those things simultaneously. So I don't know if the way that we have designed our relationship is, I don't know how usual or normal that is, but I mean, I feel like we have a lot of jargon, like, coaching jargon. We use a lot of coaching terms on a hourly, daily basis. We work really well together. We communicate really well together. I mean, there are obviously times where there's friction, but it's usually for a good reason, and there's learning to be had from it. And I feel like that's the biggest thing. I feel like there's an understanding around, if there is friction, like, what can we learn from it? And there's a trust that we both have each other's best interests. And this is remarkable what you can do with that kind of bond, that kind of agreement with someone. And I mean, it's a lot of responsible for the development of Coach Training EDU, and even development of my thinking in the coaching world and what's possible in this world. Yeah, maybe one day we'll put a relationship book together. We never know, but not for now. We have enough on the plate.
I am curious, John, how would you say that coaching has impacted your relationship?
Listening, being able to empathetically listen. And to listen to listen and understand that in the moment of listening, it's not that there's a specific reaction that needs to be required, except really understanding where the other person is coming from. And then really trusting that if you do that, if you go that empathetic listening, if you really are listening on the other side, you can avoid feeling like automatically defensive or feeling like, okay, like I need to react in some way. There's just seems to be a deeper pool of deep listening available. And yeah, I mean, especially when you're sleep deprived and, you got all the things that are there, it's almost like a relief to know that listening is so valuable. I feel like as the world gets noisier, listening becomes the master skill. And basically, as coaches, we're professional listeners. And one thing that we've been playing lately and talking about, for instance, this right example, there's something that I've been playing with a lot is being curious about what are the internal questions that we're asking ourselves. For example, a lot of people when they wake up, or a lot of people when they're having a challenge, they'll ask themselves, their internal dialogue will be something like, well, what's wrong with me? Why is this not working? What do I need to be doing different? How can I fix this? Right? Like those are the questions they're asking. Those are the internal question sets. Those lead to very specific kinds of feelings, emotions. Those lead to an activation of the fight or flight or fight systems, like the stress systems. Like those are stressful things to ask yourselves. But instead you could ask questions like, what am I doing well? What is, what is the universe, or like, what is God's plan for me today? What is my, like, what is it for me to contribute? How can I be my best self today? Like those questions, right? You can almost feel, like, do you feel an internal difference when I'm just asking those questions? Like it's so one thing for example, we've been talking about this, for a little bit now, but we'll check in like, hey, how are your internal questions? That's the level of communication.
I love it.
Like, oh, we have something coming up. We want to take the girls on, to some place. What are the internal questions we're going to ask ourselves? What's our intention for the trip? How are we going to, like, so one thing that it leads to is it doesn't mean that everything is all happy and smiley all the time. Be like, yay, happy, joy. There's that, but there's also when things aren't that, what we've noticed is that the recovery time is actually quite quick. So it's not like there's no sadness or doom and gloom or moodiness, that's there. It's just the recovery time tends to be faster. And the more communication, I feel like the faster the recovery time. But again, we have a sample size of one family. Like I'm not, we don't have a lot of insight. We don't have this degree of insight into all families or, all relationships. So, our sample size is, but it's something I'm curious about, and think, that's just an example of how the level of communication that's happening.
Wow, thanks, John. So I'm hearing listening to understand versus listening to respond. And then you have your own systems for asking those internal questions, which again is listening to self and then checking in with each other and being curious about each other's internal questions.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Wow. And John always sets this up perfectly for me, everyone, and we don't talk about it beforehand.
I do like to be surprised. I like the spontaneity of it. I really do. I mean, maybe it's, I don't know, maybe it's a flaw, but I choose to feel like it's a feature.
It always works out fantastically. So it is Valentine's Day, and I know even in our team meeting, we talked about love languages. And I posted something on LinkedIn today around self-love and leadership. And some of these things that you're talking about, asking those internal questions. So, John, what does self-love mean to you?
I think it's a deep acceptance of, I think it's a deep acceptance of even the hard things. I think at my best, I know I'm doing well when I'm even thankful for the hard challenges or the things I'm not, like, particularly, things I wish I could change, not stewing in, I should have done this differently 10, 20 years ago, or thinking, remember that time when, if I just done this, not that. Like, I feel like for me, it's a lot of staying out of that. That could have gone better this way or that, but really looking at being conscious of the kinds, when you talk about internal questions, like being conscious of the kinds of internal questions I'm asking myself. From from this whole idea, I think these internal questions are extremely habitual, and they're largely go under the radar screen. And I do think it is like the foundation of how, the perspective from which we see ourselves. I know a lot of people point to the surface things like, are you exercising? Are you sleeping? Are you eating, drinking water? Are you doing, those kind of things? And I think those to me are like symptoms of that deeper, kindness, that internal dialogue to ourselves. I'm not sure what it's so complex, humanity is so complex. I'm not sure what is the driver of the show. Do the questions drive, to what degree do the questions drive the show? Or if you go and drink water, get exercise, get good sleep, eat nutritious food, do those things lead to better questions? Like which comes first? I don't know. But I think that's, to me, those internal questions seem to be central to almost everything.
Okay, so internal questions is a state of appreciation. I was hearing self-forgiveness, perhaps self-trust. What components of self-love can coaches coach or use with their clients in sessions?
Yeah, I've been impressed, Raj, on what you've said about this too. I mean, especially with your working with executive, your expertise working with executive clients. So I'm kind of curious, actually. What are what are your questions? That I mean, this I feel like this is something that you emphasize a lot in your work.
Yeah, so the main component of the work that I do with executive leaders and when I do group coaching as well, we look at leadership starts with self. And when we're looking at leadership starts with self, we're looking at those facets of emotional intelligence, which start with self-awareness, self-regulation, moving on to social awareness, and then relationship management. But we spend a lot of time around this self-awareness piece. And what does it mean to understand yourself? What does it mean to like yourself? And then moving on to that self-love. What does self-love look like? And often I've had kind of kickback from people around, well, it seems selfish, especially women leaders that I work with. It seems really selfish to focus on self-love, or almost narcissistic in a sense. So when we start to drill down and look at self-love, it's always around that self-trust bit. For me, I ask myself the question around how much do I trust myself? Do I have my own back? Because when I do, and I'm aligned to my values, I know that I've done the best that I can in a day. And I can put my head on the pillow and sleep at night. So we always use a values tool. We start to have a look at, what are your values? How does it align to who you are as a person? And then connecting it further with giving yourself permission to be you, and not shifting and changing that based on what the world says, or what a leader should look like. What I've loved when I work with women in groups, and sometimes I use the quote from Wizard of Oz, Glinda the Good Witch, and she says, "You always had the power, my dear." Because we're not asking people when I'm running the programs to change who they are. It might be an upgrade. You've got to learn to know who you are, understand who you are, and love who you are, and then think about where you want to take that next.
Yeah, it's so cool. It's so cool.
So why do you think it's important to talk about self-love in leadership training?
I think anytime something's trying to do something new, something that they've never done before, perhaps something that no human has ever done before, in this sense, there's going to be mistakes. There's going to be things that you don't know yet. And these blind spots or these unknowns, they do have a cost. And it can be somewhat painful not to get to that, not to get the understanding that was needed to be in place. And so there's this, it feels a little bit like a race, like a race for understanding, a race for learning, a race for right action, a race for communication. But anytime there's a race, there's going to be costs involved where, okay, do this, not that. And that decision-making process has to happen sometimes really quickly. So when in that space, you have to take risk, and there's going to be mistakes. And it's just the cost of doing business. I remember once, I think I told the story, I don't know, probably a dozen times. I know I'm going to be one of those people who tells my grandchildren at some point in time the same story 20 times. I'm going to tell it again. So a college buddy, or a high school buddy, we're in college, I'm visiting him in Connecticut. I leave one of my favorite blazers at this place. And we're back at his apartment. I realize this and I'm bummed out. He looks at me and says, that's just the cost of doing business. And that concept was new to me at that time. And he explained it to me. I said, all right, I get it. I understand it. But I think any of that as a leader, self-love, it's you have to accept that mistakes are going to happen. It's just the cost of doing business. Even something happened last night. There was a miscommunication between somewhere in our family. It wasn't a big thing, but and it was. And you just realize, there's a communication between parents and coordination, like who was going to watch the little guys and, this thing. And it's just, it was no one's fault directly. It just was the cost of doing business. If you're going to operate between 8 different people, 3 different families, there can be, and it's just, so don't feel bad about it. Yeah. I mean, maybe with optimal communication, you could have been avoided. But there's no way to predict that. There's no way to predict that family, C was going to offer, this, but then that didn't work out because, what I mean? So in life, there are going to be costs of doing business, costs of doing life. Accept it. And I feel like that's where the self-love comes in, because you can beat yourself up relentlessly. Or you cannot. Learn and move on.
Learning, moving on, asking
Self-love.
internal questions, self-love.
That's self-love. Yeah. From a leadership standpoint, and it's not that you don't care or you're in it, because the problem is sometimes if you get too in it, then it becomes a, if you get attached, to the regret or, the internal beating up, it comes out sideways. It doesn't resolve. But if you go, okay, cool, what can I learn from this and move on? Then it becomes something where you can just do it, move on.
Yeah.
I mean, it has to happen, or else you can't emotionally do it. You just can't be in it. And that's what I see when I talk to a lot of, when I was doing executive coaching, this idea of self-love is a lot of it around grace, around this, past decisions, but then using the learning to inform future action.
And from my experience, what I've found is the more appreciation I can have for myself, the more I can learn from things, the more I'm able to forgive, the happier and content I am. I show up very differently for others. I am less judgy and I have more empathy. What I've learned is that when I have empathy for myself and acknowledge myself, it's much easier for me to be like that for other people as well.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah, I agree.
So if we're thinking about kind of people's internal dialogue or asking internal questions, we have a question here from a coach that's asking, my client seems incapable of saying no. How can I help them give themselves permission to say no?
I feel like my coaching style is so abrupt and just giving them the assignment to say no to everything for a week. And I would probably pitch that idea to them, say, okay, great. So let's do it. Let's say no to everything for a week and see what happens. And then usually in real time, the client will have some sort of low grade anxiety, we'll call it low grade feelings of, there's no way I could ever do that. Or my world will fall apart. This is not, there's no way. But then you go back to the idea of, if a coach is attached to the idea that I need to get my client to say no, the coach is falling into 2 different traps. First is being attached to your client taking a specific action. And that means that a lot of the questions then are going to start having the energy of trying to lead someone to a certain action step. And I've listened to a lot of coaching like that. I used to do a lot of coaching like that when I was a beginning coach. It's not good. And that leads to the second thing is that in that instance, a coach is solution hunting. They're not insight hunting. And so when in my if I were coaching this person and I would say, hey, so for this next week, like say no, your assignment is to say no to every single thing. I'm not attached to my client doing that. It's not like I'm saying, do this for real. What I'm really after is I am looking for some sort of real-time reaction on that coaching call so that my client can gain an insight into why do they do that?
Yeah.
What's there? What's behind your saying yes to everything? And in this space, let's explore it. So my technique would be to ratchet up the context so that we can have it gives better opportunity for insight to occur. That's how I'd approach it on a tactical level in a coaching session.
Yeah.
And why?
Yeah, because there's lots of curiosity around that, isn't there? I'm curious about,
Yeah.
well, when they say no, what would they be? No, what do they say yes to? And also the motivation. Is it intrinsic or is it extrinsic? Does this connect? Are they a helper? I don't know. I'm just so curious about, I work with so many helpers, being one myself. What is driving that? Where is it coming from, as you said?
What tends to happen is a lot of these, we'll call them maladjustments, or it's maybe too psychology. I mean, that would be the word, the psychology. I mean, I've been reading a lot of studies lately, a lot of papers. Maybe a more coachy word would be incongruencies. Like there's an incongruency between my value set, my action set, and follow through sets, right? So if there's inconsistencies between those, it usually comes down to a feeling of worth. Like, how do I find worth for myself? Or like, am I worthy?
Yeah.
Or to what degree am I worthy? And that idea, talk about internal space. Woo! To be comfortable here, but not from a standpoint of, I'm not going to diagnose it. I'm not going to judge it. I'm not going to tell you what you need to do or the action steps or say, hey, this is how, this is where I think that therapy is really valuable, because therapy can go here and the therapist has a lot of training to, recognize patterns, okay, yeah, this is, these are the different degrees of health. And, that's what therapists can do. That's useful. That's useful to in coaching. It's useful to do in conjunction with coaching, because a coaching perspective in that space is very much, okay, client, we're here. We're exploring it. We're curious about it. Now I'm going to empower you. What do you want to do, even with the space of am I worthy? How can we embrace even this question, this internal question? That can change your life. And in coaches, we get to see that in real time. We get to be on the front row seat of that. Every day, every coaching session, we're in the front row seat of that, operating under the surface, whether we know it or not. It's operating, and that's why I love this profession. Love this kind of listening and this deep connection with other people. It's astounding. It really, truly is.
Thank you, John. I know we're almost at time, and it seems like we've looped back round from am I worthy to that kind of self-love piece here. How would you like to close us out today?
Happy Valentine's Day, everyone. Happy Valentine's Day. I think there's elements of just allowing yourself to be human and loving the humanity of it, even the bad days, the grumpiness. Like, if I don't get on a mountain bike or get out there, I get grumpy, so even loving that aspect too. Yeah. Well, it's just fun to be here with you. in this
Thanks,
space.
John.
These questions, I love, you're queuing this up this way. And I know we mentioned, giving people a preview of what's to come in the coming weeks. So maybe we'll start doing that and getting other people on here, not just me.
Yeah.
And keeping these going. But it's so lovely to hear your voice, your energy. You're very color complementary. Like your nails, even your nails match your shirt. Match.
I try. It's self-love, you see?
It's so congruent. Like you just are like, I am the congruence is, going like from the tips of your fingers to the threads you're choosing. It's amazing.
Thank you. I appreciate it. Yeah. Yeah, work in progress. We've got to take care of ourselves. And, for me, it's being intentional. I said this in the new year. It's being intentional this year and caring for self even more. So right on theme. But I appreciate you, John. Thank you, everyone, for listening. We'll start giving you a taster from next week of what's to come and other guest speakers. So please send us your questions. Look forward to hearing from you. Bye.